this is Federico from TeachingEntrepreneurship.org. Today you will have an opportunity to get an awesome new exercise to run in your entrepreneurship class about how to improve creativity. This exercise can be found and downloaded as a free lesson plan to copy or to improve on from TeachingEntrepreneurship.org, and it has been shared by Fleck, who is Director for the Center of Economics, Business and Entrepreneurship Education, and also Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship at Susquehanna University. And today I have the pleasure to have Emma with me. Emma, thank you for being here.
Delighted. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad that we can talk, and in particular today we are going to talk about the role and importance of creativity to the entrepreneurial process and how creativity can be used as a fundamental component for problem solving, innovation, and entrepreneurial activities. And we're also going to talk about some of the methods that you use to support this. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic, but before to directly jump into the details, can you tell us a little bit about what led you to become an entrepreneurship professor?
Sure, absolutely. So I was doing an undergraduate thesis in women in leadership, and as part of that, I was exploring sort of the concept. And out of that, when it became time and I decided to go into academia and do a PhD, I was still really interested in the gender concept, but not necessarily in the management and the leadership. So I started to explore entrepreneurial activity. And actually, that was my PhD thesis, was to look at entrepreneurial activity amongst women entrepreneurs and how they were fundamentally different. And so I'd never imagined that I would go on to be an academic per se, a teacher. Actually, being in the classroom is what I love the most. And working alongside students and to see that. So when I moved to the US 4.5 years ago, I was in a heavily teaching orientated institution, and from there I really remembered what a wonder it was to teach, and also the difficulties associated with teaching and how tough it is to engage an audience. And entrepreneurship for me, it's really cool because it's still an emerging topic. It's not like the management discipline or economics or accounting. Entrepreneurship is this cool emerging discipline. And the really exciting thing about being in the classroom and teaching entrepreneurship was that there's so many different ways to do it and methodologies, and this was coming. And so that's what really sort of sparked my interest in more pedagogy. And that's where I kind of am at the moment, is that I am really passionate about pedagogy and how we teach entrepreneurship and how we can excite the next generation of entrepreneurs.
And can you give us a quick highlight why creativity is so important in the entrepreneurial process?
Absolutely. So for me and many others I know who are listening and watching, is that entrepreneurship is no longer taught as a business planning process. We're very much beyond that to the entrepreneurial mindset. And for me, there are three components which make the entrepreneurial mindset: is the innovation, is the ability to problem solve, and it's the concept of creativity. And I think that we're really very good at understanding the concept of innovation from multiple facets and from multiple different disciplines and ways. Similarly, we really understand the concept of problem solving and how to solve problems through various mechanisms. But this elusive creativity is something that I think we're still trying to understand. How do we teach it? Can we teach it? What are we trying to do when we talk about creativity? So for me, this idea of entrepreneurship, there's this fundamental piece that we're still exploring, and especially not necessarily exploring that it's part of entrepreneurship, because we know that that's been proven, that this creativity is fundamental to the entrepreneurial process. But how can we teach it? How can we understand it better? And that's really where I am at the moment with it.
And what's the goal of this exercise you're talking about?
I think there's two things. One is to be creative in the process of actually doing this. And two is to attempt to ignite creativity in our undergraduates maybe specifically, but I think that this goes for all. So it's really to try and get, and I'll go into it in more detail later, but it's to try and get people to remember. I did a lot of research about when are we most creative in our lives, and a lot of the research is telling us we were most creative and had a flow of creativity naturally when we were much younger. So our creativity kind of is really inspired at about age 5 and 6. We're very, very creative people, but we don't know what to do with that creativity at that stage. And so it takes into adolescence and adulthood to join the dots. And so I was really fascinated by the work of Borowski and started to think about, well, if that's the case, if we're really creative back here, how can we somehow start to embody those feelings, to go back at a time we were really creative, but then use the ability of problem solving to join the dots to help us to be more creative people. So this was the idea, and I've tested it a few times in my classroom. I say a few times, multiple times, and I'm refining and honing the process. But I'm really excited because I think that there's very few exercises out there at the moment that I have seen, certainly in entrepreneurship, that really try and get to the heart of what creativity is.
And why this exercise is so critically important for entrepreneurship students?
Well, I think that, again, it's going back to that idea of the entrepreneurial mindset. We really do understand how to teach innovation. You know, there's many great scholars out there who are telling us how to put innovation and to teach innovation and the theory behind innovation. Similarly, most business and other students are pretty good at problem solving by the time. And so we've kind of honed in that we know how to teach problem solving and we know how to test problem solving. And I think fundamentally we're still missing that core component of creativity. And what is it? Is it based on traits? Is it cognitive? What do we do it? How do we capture it? And then how do we use it? And so if we've only got these two fundamental parts of entrepreneurship or the entrepreneurial mindset, this third one kind of hangs out loosely. And my hope is that the exercise is just one starting point to really start to think about this creativity process and how we teach it to really form strongly this entrepreneurial mindset, because I think that is the one element that has kind of been forgotten so far, especially in terms of how do we teach it.
What content and what critical entrepreneurial skills will students learn?
Oh, that's a great question. So again, it's sort of about embodying this notion of when I was younger and how can I be this creative person. Just to take you back a little bit, actually, some of my research when I started into this process, first of all, I was highly inspired by my children. I have two young kids, and a lot of what I do was kind of inspired off of them, because when they started to go to school last year, as a mom, I was researching the education system here in the United States, and I'm from Europe. Fundamentally two different education systems for the most part. But what I started to learn and understand was that this idea of creativity is kind of arguably being stifled in our K-12 system. And I'm sure that stretches beyond the United States. And so we've got this focus on standardization and accountability and testing. And that started to worry me as an educator. Why are we not making sure our young people have this fundamental part of their education? Why are they not, really capturing this? Because we now know that is such an important part of business and so that's kind of what inspired me in terms of reading more about this. And so what skills are people going to have when they finish this exercise? Well, I really hope that they have the ability to remember and to capture the feelings of creativity when they were younger. But not simply to capture and hold it and have a fun time through these 60 minutes, but to actually, can I take this feeling of no limitations? Can I take this feeling of excitement? Can I take this feeling of problem solving in a different way and actually apply it to entrepreneurial problem solving? So again, it's about taking those feelings of creativity and helping us to join the dots. So Borowski says that when we get to adulthood, we finally get to the point where we can experience creativity and it's used with purpose. And that's very much what I wanted to do. The skill is, can I take those feelings of creativity and use them with purpose to solve problems?
Okay, and should the teacher, the instructor, prepare any material before this lesson, for instance, printouts, audio, video, stuff like that?
So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can do the exercise as a sort of, in testing this multiple times, I've really found that there's a 3-stage process to this. In the prep process, I would suggest showing or asking students to watch some of the TED Talks, Do Schools Kill Creativity, or Changing the Educational Paradigm by Sir Ken Robinson. Now, some of that is quite controversial, but it's incredibly interesting to see what he has to say about the K-12 education system and how creativity is a little bit stifled through that process. And what does that mean for our economic system, and what does that mean for entrepreneurship? So that's quite good. Also, an article by Swartz in 2011, How to Think Creatively. It's really interesting because it talks about the entrepreneurial process. As entrepreneurs, we have to start to use both sides of our brain, both left and right. because we're very, students are very left-brain thinkers. They're specifically at college, we're taught to be rational thinkers to solve problems. So those are kind of a couple of things that are nice to prep with, but again, it's entirely up to the professor. The one thing that is mandatory as preparation is to ask the students to go out and talk to people, maybe members of their family, their parents, their grandparents, about what they were like as 5-year-olds, what other people say about them as a 5-year-old. And maybe they'd like to bring in a stuffed animal, a photograph, something like that. And they're kind of confused by that concept. But so in preparation, go away and talk to people about who knew you at 5 years old, and to bring that information back to the classroom before the exercise.
Can you also walk us through how you execute this exercise in class?
Absolutely. So if you decide to do the prep work, that makes for a really nice sort of preparation class almost. So it's a nice time to have controversial discussions about this idea of creativity and whether the education supports that or in fact sort of stifles that. So that's the first. However, when you go into the actual exercise, the first 20 minutes of that exercise should very much be about that 5-year-old self. So I'm splitting maybe into small teams and asking each of the teams to talk to one another, give them out some cardboard materials, drawing materials, ask them maybe to develop a poster, a very brief poster, who was I? Ask questions like, who was I inspired by? What did I dream to be? What were my conversations about at that time? What did I love to do? And what were the limitations that I had on my life at that time? And this is a really lovely time to share. And the students really enjoy to be able to share something about their past and their history. So this time, it's very important to make the students feel safe and comfortable, but to share this information. And one of the things that comes out in those first 20, 25 minutes is this idea of information and boundless possibilities in life. When I grow up, I'm going to be ... an astronaut, a doctor, a brain surgeon. You never know what you're going to find, but it's lovely, and you see that sort of remembering, and it's a very nice feeling. And then it sort of moves, and we say, well, what happened? What happened between then and now? You're in this class. What happened between then? Yeah. And we had a lot of discussion about reality check. Well, that wasn't being an astronaut wasn't a possibility. Being a rock star, wasn't really a possibility. So this is how I ended up. And so we say, right, well, let's those lovely feelings of when we were 5. And this is when the superhero stuff happens. And again, inspired by my own children, who we used to have superhero Saturdays in our house when my kids loved to dress up and jump off tables and chairs, and had the conversations we had were lovely because we had this gorgeous imagination that just had no limitations. And so that's where my inspiration came from. And so at this point, this is where I bring out lots of things like superhero masks and drawing materials and crafting things. And I ask the students to embody that 5-year-old superhero. Who was this person? And what kind of feelings did they have? And so we spend about 20 minutes really just getting into that, having a lot of fun. And I actually sort of play in the background music such as this. So we kind of have a lot of fun at this moment where things are a bit crazy in the classroom and everyone's sort of either dressing up or drawing something or making something. We have to talk about what kind of entrepreneurial traits and what kind of superhero characteristics are we talking about. And really at that point, we're very much getting into the nitty-gritty of endless possibilities, no limitations, the ability to see through walls, the ability to do this, the ability to be invisible, the ability to help others. And that's lovely, and it's a really fun time. And coming down from that can be a bit of a problem, but we eventually settle down and go back to the classroom. And the final part then of the exercise is the reflection. And I think fundamentally that's an incredibly important part of the exercise. And the reflection can either be done very briefly at the end of class. It could also be done as a written exercise, maybe later on in the semester, as a reflective piece for assessment, or it can in fact be done in the next class as quite a large exercise. It's really up to the professor what kind of time period they have. But really what we try to do in the reflective piece is say, well, let's look at what we were, these superheroes, the embodiment of our 5-year-old selves. And can we use some of these experiences or feelings to help solve entrepreneurial problems? So I find it works especially well later in the semester when we're having a difficult period. Maybe it's solving a problem of finances, solving a customer-related problem. And we say, okay, let's go back to those feelings of endless possibilities, of limited, no limitations, of can we think of a way around this? So it's very much that idea of reflecting upon, can we capture the feeling of creativity and can we use it in an entrepreneurial context?
Okay, so this is basically how the professor helps students embody the learning from this exercise.
Exactly, yes, exactly. And it's very important to do that point, because if it's left as a single kind of fun exercise, I think, wow, that was a fun hour I just had in the classroom, but they really don't connect with the emotions of it or the why we did it. So it really depends on what time you have, but even a 5-minute reflection to let the class calm down and to really just have a few questions. And it's amazing. I mean, some of the feedback I'll share with you that I have received over time with the reflections is a student says, I don't think of myself as a creative person, but this activity to bring me back to a time in my life when I was the most creative and that my ideas had no limitations. Or one student, which was lovely, this was my last year of college, and I realized that most of the time I was conditioned to overanalyze, memorize, and get good grades. But this showed me that I have to go back to the most basic, innocent way of thinking. And while it was fun, it actually had a powerful impact upon me. And I've already started to use this way of thinking both inside and outside of school situations. So that reflection piece is incredibly important, because unless you connect the dots at that point, they really don't see it as anything but a fun exercise.
Can you provide us with a couple of stories about running this exercise previously?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think it's lovely, and when the music starts and everybody, starts to don masks, and that includes myself. I think one of the things, if you don't feel too weird about it, it's kind of, I'm part of this, I'll go with it, and to really, enjoy the time with your students. And some of them, they're just so lovely, and they share so much during those sort of 45, 50 minutes about themselves and their lives and the dreams that they emotional about, why did that dream change, and they kind of open up quite a lot about that. I think that there are some downsides of this as well, and I want to make you fully aware of the exercises that people feel silly, and some people don't like to feel silly. And so I think I originally did this exercise whereby I kind of made them or forced them to be a part of it, forced them to put on a mask or do whatever. And I realized pretty quickly that, especially with maybe my senior students or my introvert students, that it just wasn't a comfortable situation. And so I think you have to assess that situation in your own classroom and decide, well, if they don't want to dress, is there a way that they could draw something or be creative or write a poem or write something or song lyrics that kind of just connect? It's the same process. It's still that creative process, and we can still have that reflection piece, but that they don't feel as silly as they perhaps would, dressing up or doing something. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun. Right, I've tested this at the high school level. So I teach a summer class here at the institution for high school students. So I've tested it there right up to the senior level graduates. And I find that it really works in 99% of the cases, so it's been a lot of fun.
According to you, what should the instructor be aware of when adopting this method?
I think know your class, know the limitations of your class. I think that you can still have very good conversations in a class that might be highly conservative, and we can still have a lot of good conversations. We can still engage our students with the same themes and perhaps not go to the same extent. In knowing your class, you'll know what they will respond to. Will they respond to the dressing up? Will they respond to something else? Will they simply respond to having the same conversations about their 5-year-old selves, and can you do that? So that would be my thing. I wouldn't recommend you do this in the first 2 weeks of class. I would know your class a little bit better. Try and understand those who it's going to be difficult to engage. Make them feel comfortable. Make students know that this is a safe space. I always tell my students there's not to be any Snapchatting or photographs unless approved. So that everyone...
So you're trying to create this kind of safety environment, right?
Absolutely. It's a safe environment where it's okay to open up and to talk about feelings, and to capture those feelings. I mean, we're not trying to drill down into any, embedded emotions in students. We're not, we're no expert in that. But really, we're just trying to think about all of those really wonderful emotions and feelings that many young people have. As I say, that idea of no limitations, and I can be whatever, and no one's going to tell me I can't, because no one does, right?
And to wrap up a little bit, what are the pros and the cons of this exercise according to you?
I think the pros are that there's a good relationship built with your students. I think that after we do this, there is an openness between a student and a professor, and that's always hard to achieve. I think in an entrepreneurship class, that can be a very important part to achieve as well, that a student feels comfortable in having hard, difficult discussions about what they're going through in terms of their entrepreneurial process, their problem-solving process. And so having that and knowing that they can have that relationship with the professor in terms of openness is really important. So that's a really good pro. I've also noticed that later in the semester, if students are willing to either take a picture of themselves dressed up or have some sort of icon or memorabilia of that moment, I ask them to, keep it in their backpack, keep it in their bag. So when we are having moments of frustration, of difficult times during the process, then I'm able to say, pull me out your photograph, or pull me out your icon that you made, and let's spend a few minutes going back over the exercise that we did. Do you remember the feelings? Can we go back to those feelings and capture those feelings again, and remember that we can solve this problem, that we are this problem-solving creative person who will get to the end of this difficult time. And that's just one of the really good pros. Some of the cons are, for sure, I think that I'm still developing some of this methodology. I'm not sure how successful. I've never outside of a 25 person class. I'm not sure how this would work in a very large classroom. So I would say that this is definitely sort of geared towards that smaller class orientation rather than the large. So scaling this exercise may be a problem. Again, I think when I said about know your class, perhaps there are good elements of this that you can do, but whether you can do the full reflection and whether you can make that space safe and comfortable for a large classroom, I think that we need to do some more testing on that. But we still can have those discussions about creativity, the education system, about our 5-year-old selves. So I think there's definitely elements that can still be modified and combined to help that. To me, this is definitely, I think it's the whole idea of entrepreneurship education in general. We're at this wonderful evolving time in entrepreneurship education, and I would love feedback from anyone who wants to give this a go. I would love to see how this works for other people, how they can modify this process and change it, and what they have found has worked. As I say, I was inspired by my own little boys and their freedom of creativity at that age, which bore this idea of looking into it further. So I'm sure that other people have some wonderful ideas that they could share with me, and together we can create new exercises surrounding this issue.
So you're prototyping and refining it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Do you grade students on this exercise?
I do not grade them on anything. I suppose if you wanted to, you could grade them on participation. Are you willing to go outside of your comfort zone and participate at least in some form of the exercise? I have not. What I have graded on in my senior level class is the reflective piece. So later in the semester, about 4 or 5 weeks later, when we're in the middle of customer interviews and problem solving, deep and difficult, I make them do a reflective writing piece. And I make them bring those feelings of what we have done in that exercise to this idea. And I have used that as a piece of assessment for the class. So I have done that, which has worked really well.
Now a question that I like to ask to all our professors. What is a recurrent teaching entrepreneurship nightmare you have?
Oh, that's easy. Lack of participation. I think, once again, to me, entrepreneurial education is at the forefront. It's so exciting to be a part of it. When I think about all my colleagues here in the business school, teaching management or teaching finance or teaching accounting, and And many of them are doing really cool things. But to me, entrepreneurship is doing such wildly wonderful things when I look at all of my colleagues in the entrepreneurship education field. And what I notice reflecting upon that is that we are now teaching iGeners. We're past millennials. We're now into this iGen generation, and iGeners are really different. And when we look at how we're teaching, or the education system as a whole, many of us are still teaching what we used, or the mechanisms we use are the same that we used to use 2 and 3 generations ago. And the question is, why are we still doing that? Why are we still standing in front of a classroom?
Why are we still teaching like in the Middle Age, right?
Yeah, exactly. So why are we still standing in front of a classroom and trying to talk at people? And so I love the fact that many of us in this realm are really pushing the boundaries and doing different things. However, there are problems with pushing these boundaries, and one of them I find in my classroom, and this is why it's a reoccurring nightmare, is because sometimes students just want to be talked at. It's what they know, it's what they understand, and so making them do alternative things, alternative pedagogies and methodologies, and making them get hands-on can be difficult. And so my definite reoccurring nightmare is definitely engagement. When you get that face of, really, you're making us do this? What? I hate that face. I was like, come on, work with me here. I'm in this with you. I'm trying this alongside you. And so that is definitely part of it. It's how do I
So you are trying to solve this nightmare, as far as I understand.
get them all on board. So for sure, it's that idea of, can I engage everybody? Because I think it's easier to engage traditional format than to try new things, and that's hard.
So how can we find out more about the work that you are doing, and how can listener connect with you if they want to?
Absolutely. So this work is actually a paper that I've written for USASB, and so I'll be presenting that at USASB this year in January down in LA. I also have my Google Scholars link, which I can share with everyone, a LinkedIn, or I'd love to hear from people via email. My email is Fleck, F-L-E-C-K-E @susqu.edu. So I'm at Susquehanna University, and you can find me there. So I'd love to hear if anybody wants to try this or connect or give it a go. I would love your feedback to help refine the process and to hear your stories too.
Excellent, Emma. Thank you indeed for your time, and thanks for the information too. Thanks for watching or listening. If you enjoyed the interview and you want to download the free lesson plan and receive the latest updates about the best practices and techniques for teaching entrepreneurship, exclusive resources, tools, exercises, and much more, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter at TeachingEntrepreneurship.org, where we are helping entrepreneurship professors replacing frontal lectures with entrepreneurial experiences, since there is no better teacher than experience. Emma, thanks again for your contribution.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
See you soon.